watching this. Hope everybody has had a wonderful holiday break. I know I did, man. A lot of y'all were hitting me up asking, JT, when's JT Sports Live coming back? We are back and better than ever, people. And we had a fantastic day of college football. Don't ever let anybody lie to you and say that bowl games are meaningless, because South Carolina and Illinois were putting it all on the line in the Citrus Cheez-Its Bowl today. Shane Beamer and Brent Bielema will be on top of the cake for what has been an incredibly disappointing season. And, you know, you end tonight off going into 2025 watching Penn State win 31-14 over Ashton Genty and Boise State. I want to give my thoughts. They're playing their best football and started. You knew they were going to be in the playoffs, but would you admit little games, James Franklin, as their head coach, CFP this season, that, let's just be honest, they weren't really that good. And then you just took control of this game against Boise State in the fourth quarter. You know, we're going to dive into this game. We're also going to bounce around the college football world. The Clemson dynasty, to me, isn't over yet. I think that we are about to witness a resurgence out of Dabo's quote, quitting on the Canes in the second half of that game. But the last is me as a Hurricane fan, because post-Cam Ward Miami doesn't really give me a lot of optimism for the future. You know what's fun? 2 years later, they have their second best season in 22 years, and yet they get considered the most overhyped team in college football. How about Kalen DeBoer's first season at Bama? Is it just a complete disappointment, and is he about to tank what being the disappointment on Jalen Milroe? What about the transfer college football? Because tampering is at an all-time high. I saw the UConn head coach basically out all of the coaches who have been tampering with his players, because it's one thing to steal players from the portal from a smaller school, but it's another thing when you're trying to entice players who haven't put their name in the portal. They currently are committed to the school that they play for, and yet you're trying to incentivize them to leave, and you're Cincinnati. You will never see a G5 team like Boise State ever have a chance to compete for the national championship, because anytime they get some good players, all those guys always chase the bag most of the times, and they go to the bigger program. And the smaller guys, the smaller school, implementation of the portal and tampering happening, and nobody seeming to care because nothing's being done about it. And the portal has also, along with the NIL, ended the SEC did over these last couple of days. They did college football fans a huge out there, because the SEC is always undefeated when it comes to hypotheticals. Because a few weeks ago, if somebody would have told you that, you know, the SEC teams never lose the hypotheticals, well, finally putting an end to the SEC hypothetical. Everybody, wherever you're watching, hit that bell icon so you don't miss with your friends, family members, acquaintances. And give us a 5-star Facebook. We are not just a YouTube channel. JT Sports Podcast is available. And let's jump to Final Four of the college football playoff. The scoreboard, this looks like it was a complete one-sided. This was a pretty competitive game from the start of the third quarter to early in the fourth quarter, when Penn State broke it open with that big touchdown one that they had by Nicholas Singleton. State. Before I get into Penn State, I want to give praise to Boise State, because, look, it's easy to hammer on these G5 schools, say that they're taking up a playoff spot, they don't belong here. At one point in this game, when you're at a disadvantage from a talent standpoint, you got to be perfect, okay? And Boise State was far from perfect. They had 4 turnovers. Madsen threw 4 interceptions, 3 of them, and was already out of reach. They also had a lot of, it just was really tough. They were playing like some dogs. Every time Ashton Genty got the ball, they were like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, wasn't by just one or two players. It was like 5, 6. It was like a whole swarm of Penn State players just coming for Ashton Jeanty, trying to eliminate this brother from the game. And this was, though, like he played a pretty good game because it's like breaking out of 2-3 tackles. This is a generational back. If you are somebody that keeps up with the NFL draft, Ashton Jeanty is a top 5 player coming out. This is one of the best running backs I've ever seen. Special running back. And James Franklin and company, you know, I'm not going to say that they didn't really care about anybody else on Boise State's offense, but you definitely knew that they're deep into their playbook. They had the drives. It's just that they couldn't finish a team that, I'm going to be honest, I felt was overrated for the majority of this season. You know, watching them these last 2 weeks against Boise State and SMU, they just look like a man amongst boys. Remind you that they pretty much only playing like a few minutes. Something felt like they had the game under to kick themselves in the foot based off the fact that they can beat you a multitude of different ways. You also have a really great ground game and the K-Tron Allen because, look, you talk about in college football, 134 rushing yards. He was making guys look silly out there. I was playing with on that field because it looked like Boise State did not want to tackle this run in the fourth quarter is what put this game on ice. More athletes than what Boise State had. And overall, they were just so dominant up front that you have to stick with what got you here. And what got Boise State to this point is that Ashton Jeanty has been so dominant. And I took Boise season. And the best chance to pull off an upset against a team that has a significantly large talent gap over you is that you play them early where they still got a lot of kinks to work out. And they were lucky enough that they only lost to Oregon by 3 points. So if they were to play Oregon again, I feel that's a different ball game. And Ashton Jeanty balled out instead of Ashton Jeanty where you just didn't really see a lot of explosive runs. His biggest run of the night went for 26 yards. You know, this is a Penn State defense that has only allowed to run it in the middle of Penn State's defensive line, and you couldn't get it outside and bounce it outside the tackles on the edge. I was talking to somebody early. He was like, why doesn't Boise start off just trying to run it up the middle? Then State, they had a great season. I commend them on the effort in this game, but Penn State is a scary football team right now. I was wrong about this team. I was wrong about James Franklin. I still have my doubts about him. Because he has had, you want to see Penn State dominate the teams that they are supposed to dominate. And they, rather it be Notre Dame, you know, overall, Boise State was crawl. You remember that progressive or all-state, you got to be quicker than that. That's kind of what they all cry. Penn State didn't have to put in as more. They were having like 6-7 minute drives and coming to teams that's from a P4 conference that wouldn't have gotten a at-large bid. And they had to win their conference championship game as a 3-loss down them, make it seem like they didn't belong here because this was a pretty competitive game, in my opinion, for the most part, regardless of the score. But, you know, Penn State just had too many dogs out there for Boise State to handle. If you're new, we drop NFL and college football content every day, 365 days out of the year. So if you got the podcast, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from, the JT Sports Pod is available. The links are down in the description down below. For the first time since 2000, I think it's fair to say that Kalen DeBoer's first season in Tuscaloosa replacing the GOAT is a massive disappointment. Look, I expected Alabama to at least be in the college football games. And I thought that was fair that he was only looked good for the first month of the season. And after the first half of the Georgia game, the brother just forgot how to play quarterback. I mean, he has finished this season off with 15 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. And he has more touchdowns on the ground with 20 than he has throwing. This dude is under Kalen DeBoer because for the disaster that this season is Oklahoma, 11-26, 3 interceptions. Kalen DeBoer set Jalen Milroe up, the finalist and the top 10 pick in the NFL. Michael Penix was really good throwing the football with accuracy outside of the numbers in this offense. And everywhere Kalen DeBoer has been, he's produced not only really good losses that Kalen DeBoer, the benefit of a doubt that mainly he was given, no matter how good of a coach you are, no matter how good of an offensive mind you may be, it's just hard to develop certain quarterbacks when some guys just aren't quarterbacks. And Jalen Milroe doesn't look like a natural quarterback back there. If he can't run, he's not an effective passer throwing the ball from inside the pocket. And you've seen in this loss to Michigan, throwing the ball in the dirt, the accuracy is just hit or miss. He can't operate. You have a quarterback that's not good. When you can't operate, especially when everybody knows Jay has a great game plan of how to limit you offensively. Go all in, stacking the box to stop Jalen Milroe, force him to win from within the pocket, and boom, you got an easy recipe to beating Alabama. He had like 3 straight turnovers, and 3 out of how this season went for Alabama. When it comes to how good of a coach you may be, sometimes you get players that a stud. When he was playing for Nick Saban, he had his fair share of struggles. They barely beat Auburn. It took them a prayer to win that game in Nick Saban's last Iron Bowl. You know, and even against Michigan, if he was a reason why Nick Saban wasn't that high on Alabama this year, some people thought that he was intentionally being a little bit hard on Bama because he didn't want to give them any rat poison, but it was like he was right. This team just was not a good football team with the incompetence that they got out of Jalen Milroe this year playing the quarterback position. And if you're Kalen DeBoer, I think you're at a point where you might just, if we go our separate ways, you either declare for the draft or you come back and enter the transfer portal, and maybe you can go to a head coach that you're a better fit in their system. Because Gus Malzahn, currently the OC for Florida State, he would love Jalen Milroe at quarterback. He's the perfect quarterback for a Gus Malzahn offense, because Gus Malzahn hell bent on playing in a pro-style system where he's just not a good fit to be in a drop-back style offense. You know, he's more of those quarterbacks that you just have to completely scheme around his running ability, and with a guy like level to appease a player that really isn't a high-end quarterback when it comes to NFL standards. You know, I look at this season as a wasted year of Kalen DeBoer and Alabama. That Kalen DeBoer would have been able to elevate Jalen Milroe this year because of how good Jalen Milroe was throwing the deep ball. He was more accurate throwing the ball outside the numbers than he was throwing anything else. And I thought he would be a perfect fit for Kalen DeBoer. But, you know, once teams found out, and it's hard to win with that. So, to me, Jalen DeBoer, and I believe that if he gets a better quarterback that actually is a better fit in his system, that can more efficiently throw the football, I think that he's going to be able to get the Alabama dynasty back in humming. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Alabama right back in the playoffs, because with this team being 12 teams, it's hard to say that Alabama is not going to be in the conversation. They still have one of the top recruiting classes in America. They still have one of the best rosters in college football. You know, I'm not too worried about. And look at the moment. He beat Dan Lanning twice. He beat Steve Sarkisian and Kalen DeBoer coach for any program. So I'm willing to Jalen Milroe, because when you're this bad throwing the football, there's not too much you can do. A lot is being made of Cam Ward deciding not to play in the second half and Miami's loss to Iowa State in the Pop-Tart Bowl. But to me, as a diehard Hurricanes fan, I am forever grateful for what Cam Ward has done for this. It has been 14 going on 15 years now. So what does disappoint me is what I saw football program, and life without Cam Ward looks really depressing, because you look at how bad Emory Williams played, the fact that they didn't trust him at all. They were going ground and pound. And as soon as when the game was in his hands, he had Miami doesn't just need a new quarterback, but they need what they were. being a mid-football program, and is only one piece of the puzzle to succeed, which Mario Cristobal has done a poor job. If Cam Ward was playing for Alabama this year, they probably would have been in the playoffs. You don't get a quarterback like Cam Ward every year out of the transfer portal. This dude is truly a generational kind of talent that Mario Cristobal just wasted because he had an incompetent defensive coordinator in Lance Guidry, who he more than a few years to rebuild the football program. Doesn't to heights that they never been before. You know, they've never won as many games as what they did prior to Curt Cignetti arriving. And schedule, Curt Cignetti, who were paying able to get back to, has won SMU able to get back to, has won SMU being in the pouches, and Curt Cignetti, somebody like Mar, they get some of the best players out of high school. So instead of going for it, lost to Georgia week schedule. Week schedules, but for crying out loud, hell as well. For those being a 3, they might be a little bit better, and then after that, they come right back down to earth. It happened with Al Golden. After that, they come right back down to earth. It happened with Al Golden. It happened with Mark. And I don't remember word out this dude that they lose Mario Cristobal. So without Cam Ward, I expect Miami to go right back to what they were before Cam Ward arrived and Coral Gabriels, and that is being a mid-football brought to the University of Miami. You know, everybody doing the celebration, everybody talking about how far compete 5 catches and touchdown reception with Clemson. There was balling out against Chattanooga. This brother was out there throwing that with Clemson. This brother was out there throwing finalists for the Heisman Trophy, but maybe he partnered for a runner. And I think Trevor Lawrence, I don't get world talent, but good runners. They have really good arms. That offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley, I think the best has yet to come from this Clemson offense, because this past season, they were 23rd in points per game. Being a veteran in this system under a guy in Garrett Riley who there's a lot to be excited for when it comes to the potential in the ACC. Majority of your starters on this side of the ball, you let the team, and you return and being underclassmen who are now going to be like built to be money to throw around there. So if you thought that the Clemson again, you might want to start before the season, before we even get to spring. Clemson is definitely on offense, but they opened the season playing kind of say about the lofty expectations that I am bestowing upon them. But I don't think the Clemson dynasty is over yet. I really think that 2025 is going to be a renaissance year in terms of Clemson being lining off impressive throws, and I think the stars are perfectly aligned for them to make a national champion. 2025. Everybody, Happy New Year to my guy M Sparks. Appreciate you guys. This is like our 7th year channel. We've been doing. We got a lot of. And that teams end up facing consequences for their action, and it'll be blowing up. Anything about it, nobody really cares about it. And in Texas, Ohio State at that level, they end up Ohio State at that level. They end up to get them on our squad, and it can't love anymore because why player or unrod, and it can't love anymore because why player or unrod. I did was do the heavy load. He just makes it R5 team at a G5 is for when you have natty. A G5 is for when you have natty squad. Kobe Bryant natty squad. Kobe Bryant ball is now like these like I graduated from, so it's just unfair how the NCAA how the NCAA continues to watch and they don't do anything about them. NCAA continues to watch and they don't do anything about them. Like I was to use an NIL. You know, it's not just G5 schools, but you have at NIL. You know, it's not just G5 schools, but you have As you have a school, why would you stay it? You know, they've been starting to he isn't the only in the SEC better than the SEC. The SEC better than the SEC. 3-1, 4-1 against the SEC is because most of the best players in this sport come from down south. But now, with guys being able to transfer whenever they want to, if you get a 5-star wide receiver and he's not seeing playing time as early as his true freshman year, he can hit that portal. He can go to a school like Colorado or Texas Tech, and he could blow up winning a national championship. And now all of a sudden, he's an asset. A lot of teams tampering, taking to do so. It has taken away the high-end depth that a lot of these SEC teams used to have, because one thing about the SEC that was always noticeable, that all of these SEC teams, they never looked top. See that anymore. Why do you think that when they went back-to-back, they produced Jalen Carter, and then you had a guy like Nazir. Now, you don't have guys like Bear Alexander. In a way, the amount of depth that these SEC, but with how physical and violent a season where nobody gets injured, that never happens. You're going to have a few injuries that you have to overcome. And there's a difference between having a backup that's a redshirt so who isn't really adept to the speed of the game, and you also have a level. So with the transfer portal now, it has ruined the monopoly that the SEC once used to be, because with them no longer having a lot of depth, look at what happened to Oklahoma. They had no depth. They had to start a bunch of freshmen out there. That's what happened. Freshmen is built like Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams. You know, some of these guys need 2-3 years of development. And with a lot of these schools poaching these players from these, you no longer are going to see 5 or 6 SEC schools that are just better than everybody else. I truly believe that this season was a changing of the guard in terms of the power. I think that there truly is a good conference in college football. No, 3 years from now, the ACC could be the most dominant conference in college football. And then a year after that, it could be the Big 12. But with the transfer portal, talent is getting more spaced out, where you have so many teams now that have a fair share of blue chip talent, plus with guys that they have developed on their own, to the point where everybody can kind of rival the SEC now. Now, the SEC is still going to have the most players drafted, but that's not going to be the same story 3-5 elsewhere outside of the Southeastern Conference. We have now slowly started to see the demise of the SEC monopoly, the demise of the Don's Gridiron. Make sure that y'all go follow draft as well. Make sure that you go check my guy out. He says that's just how people are. I also think that a lot of Travis Hunter fans were ready for Ashton Jeanty to kind of have a down game so they could kind of use it against them. But it's like Ashton Jeanty, even though this was his worst performance of the season statistically, you know, I still came away more impressed with him. The fact of Wolves, it's like they smelled blood every time he touched the ball. And guys tackling Ashton Jeanty, it felt like game planning for him like that behind the offensive line that's not really up to par. Because Boise State has a good G5 offensive line, but in terms of State's offensive linemen and defensive linemen were. Shout out to everybody that's tuned podcasting platforms. I greatly appreciate you for your support. Available wherever you get your podcast from, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. The links are down in the description down below. Share this episode with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. Helps us out a lot. And subscribe, follow, turn on. Because they just did. It's the new year. So I just want to give a thank you to the Big Ten, because they just did college football a huge favor. I don't know how many of y'all are as active with these damn SEC hypotheticals. Like, as soon as Alabama, a 3-loss South Carolina, a 3-loss Ole Miss should have been in the playoffs, because if they were in the playoffs, it would have been a closer game, or they would have won that game. Because you see on the field, though, it's a completely different story. And The Big Ten right now is owning the SEC in bowl season. They are 4-1 against bowl, 21-17. We saw Michigan beat out at one point. All they had to do was beat Texas, and they would have been in the SEC champions, falling off over 4 years. Now, the starting quarterback for Illinois, if we didn't have the transfer portal, he probably would have been waiting until his third final season to start, and maybe he ends up hitting the transfer portal then, and then having to sit out a year. Money. All the teams in the South, they aren't the only ones with deep team. The SEC is now finding out that are a fish in the ocean with the Alabama, with Nick Saban, and Kirby Smart's Georgia. You only have like a fair share of SEC teams like Auburn and championships that the SEC has won from out of this conference, but you know now, Reliaquest Bowl against Michigan, and you're seeing South Carolina slip up against Illinois. I thought South Carolina would have won that game, but you know, now the Big Ten is showing us that the SEC is no longer the top dog. The Big Ten, the way that this sport keeps evolving, within the next 2-3 years from now, we're not going to be having this conversation, who's the best conference in college football, because the Big 12 is going to be just as good as now. Has helped talent spread to places that they weren't really going to before. Because if you grew up in the South, you're a Louisiana kid, you're a Florida kid, you didn't really care that much about playing in the Big Ten. You didn't care about playing on the West Coast because you grew up in the South. But now with the transfer portal, if I don't start within my first 2 years, I can go somewhere else. I can go to the West Coast and get an opportunity to get developed, get some film out there to get to the next level. And you know, they got the money to spend through the South. Now, with all of the money that is going around and the fact that we don't really have a cap on NIL money and what teams can spend, you got schools like Oregon that are just cashing out. I want this 5-star college football. And I'm glad that now with the Big Ten finally giving, they no longer can say, yeah, we're the better team because we play in the SEC. You can no longer use SEC bias as the excuse to rank certain teams higher than others with them getting the benefit of a doubt. It doesn't work like that anymore. You know now the games actually have to be played because the outcome of the game may not go the way you expected it to. Nobody thought that Oklahoma had a chance in hell at beating Alabama. Hell, nobody thought that one of those people who was saying that the SEC deserves benefits showed me just how the SEC has kind of between the top teams in the SEC and Texas. There's not a big gap. Play that you used to see out of the SEC has kind of started to dwindle. And we are seeing it now happening at a more rapid rate with how much money these other programs are getting and how much these pros have the same amount of time. They know games are meaningless. Because I was watching the Cheeses Bowl between South Carolina going at it, the physicality, the intensity that you assume. But when these players step on those bowls, you know the SEC had the Big Ten's number last year. The Big Ten had Alabama, handle Wisconsin, which is kind of deserved. You know he's being Texas A&M, and he's being for finally putting an end to all of the SEC. Brother, but I greatly appreciate you for the $10 donation. He says, hey, time is coming, King. Hey, I greatly appreciate it. Shout out to my guy, East Coast Gridiron as well. Make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to my guy because we will be having him. Hey, after what I saw in the Cheeses Bowl and the Reliaquest Bowl, if that's how you pronounce it, the SEC is no longer the top dog. It's like the Big Ten. I'm not going to say that they're the number one conference, but it definitely ain't the SEC. It's an even level playing field now. There definitely is some parity in this sport. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before I get up on out of here. You know, it's funny how 2 years ago, when Colorado only won one game in 2022, nobody was paying attention to the Buffs. Nobody was talking about them from a national standpoint. Nobody was tuning into these games. And the Boulder community wasn't even interested in watching their Buffaloes play until Deion to being one of the most talked about programs in all of college football. And this past season that Colorado just had was the second best season that this program has had in 20 years. This is the second time within that span that they have won at least 9 games, and at one point this season controlled their own destiny in terms of being able to make it to the Big 12 championship and also being able to make it to the college football playoffs, which nobody thought would have happened coming into this season. There were a lot of people that I saw on social media saying that this Deion Sanders minimum expectations to all of a sudden overachieving completely first time in a very long time. And yet, you got folks out here that want to hate on Deion Sanders for winning at Colorado, for reviving a dead program, putting some soul into the community, and calling this team overhyped. This team was not overhyped. The hype was justified because when you have one of the most recognizable athletes ever as your head coach, people want to tune in to see what he's going to do. When you have a team like Colorado that used to be a powerhouse at one point and now all of a sudden has kind of resurrected and they got a reason to tune in now, of course, people want to watch. People are going to talk about them. Everybody is hating. How people have let their hatred for one individual who they've never met in their life cloud what was an insanely successful season. And one of Colorado is with the sanctions that Kenny Dillingham inherited when he first took that job. How about Kirk Cinetti in Indiana? These are all remarkable turnarounds. But yet, everybody wants to talk about how great of a job Kenny Dillingham did, how great of a job Kurt Cignetti did at Indiana, but yet people want to demean what Deion Sanders has accomplished at Colorado, just spited and hate. They weren't overhyped. People were watching because you want to watch them to either root for them to win or root for them to lose. You were watching them because you wanted to see Deion Sanders on the sidelines, a Hall of Famer as a head. We don't really get to see situations like this where you have a head coach who gets to coach their sons, and his sons are actually pretty good. Shiloh isn't really that great, but Shedeur Sanders is the best quarterback in Colorado history. He was one of the best quarterbacks in college football during his span. He's like one of the most prolific quarterbacks statistically in FBS history. You know, there were a lot of reasons for why the hype for Colorado was justified. And I think a better term to use to describe what Colorado is, people, for some reason, just can't get over their hatred for Deion Sanders to recognize what he has done for this sport. He's had a Taylor Swift impact on college football. You have people who never watched a lick of college football up until Deion Sanders took this Colorado job. He brought hope. He brought optimism to a small town, and yet he has brought together the Boulder community. You have people who were packing the stadium, selling the stadium out to watch a freaking spring game. This brother went 9-5 at a school that just 2 years ago only won 1 game. They won 4 games his first season, Big 12, right? And they were ass. This is the best overall. Just because Sanders, in terms of, isn't a program that's playing for clicks. They're actually, at this point, I don't really think the hatred for Deion this way. Deion is the same. There are some things that he could have handled better, but we're humans. You're hating on Deion Sanders. You're trying to make it seem like he has a program full of thugs, when every day you wake up, there's a new Georgia player being arrested. When every day you wake up, there's a new Georgia player being arrested for either domestic violence, racing in the street. For either domestic violence, racing in the street. You feel he's holding these young men to a higher standard. Not just as football players, but as young men. And you're hating on this? You're calling them overhyped? What Colorado did this season is what college football is all about. The pageantry. The fact that, you know, you want to get your community much about Colorado, especially when they were bad. Now all of a sudden they're good, and they get more hate being good than what they did when they were bad. And I've never been somebody who's been scared to criticize Deion Sanders. I criticized him after they lost to Nebraska. I thought that I overhyped this team because I picked it's incredibly slanted how people on the internet talk about the success that Colorado had this season. I've never seen a head coach. I've never won in the Big 12. Winning is winning. I don't get it. I really don't understand the hate. I appreciate everybody that tuned in. Shout out to my guy N Spark. Shout out to my guy Penalis Kane. Shout out to my guy Steve Arulana. Shout out to everybody that tuned in. For the last time, Happy New Year for yourself. I hope that you don't just stick to your New Year's resolutions for 1 or 2 weeks. I hope that, your New Year's resolutions, you actually stick by them for the entirety of the year. Because there's probably a lot in store for me, but, it takes a lot of hard work to get those blessings. A lot of people want the overnight success. My high school coach used to always say that to get to where you want to be. If it was easy, 25, and I appreciate everybody for tuning in to this live stream. Before you leave up on out of here, give us a 5-star review. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow if you're